The Chief Operating Officer for the Institute of Economic Affairs, Andy Mayer. Free markets are in the dock. What's the defence?
Well, this is anything but a free market. Yeah. I mean, energy experiences some of the highest levels of intervention from the government of any market. And fundamentally, what we're seeing here is the collision between what the government has said it desires, which is a low-carbon transition, and what the fundamental duty of government is in this situation, which is security of supply. And the poor old consumer, or eventually the taxpayer, is getting caught in the middle. So what's actually happened here is that clearly demand is exceeding supply for all the reasons you set out. Yeah. Fundamentally, the pushback as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic. Where the government can be rightly accused of not being ready is they haven't planned for this. Sure. Very clearly.
Let me stop you there and we'll carry on with that in a moment, if you will. But I was very struck by John Longworth, who you know used to run the Chambers of Commerce and now runs a new businesses pressure group, but also Ian Wright, who used to be a Labour MP, chair of the Business Energy Select Committee, both of whom basically said, as things stand, we cannot afford to do everything that we're trying to do to save the planet, climate change.
Correct.
I was shocked by it. Just a given. We can't do it.
Well,
I mean, most people listening to the conversation would say we can't afford not to.
So, yeah, the government is listening at the moment to voices from the extreme end of the Green movement who want everything to have happened within the next 5 to 10 years, which is clearly impossible. If we go to the more moderate Green position, then we're talking about 2050 and net zero by that point.
So it's not a rejection in principle of the idea of we've got to do something about carbon emissions and global warming and the rest of it. Your profound disagreement, as John's and Ian's, I think, were, is that we are simply trying to do it quicker than we can afford to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And it's also, it gets very distracting when you go from that position into starting to debate climate change. Because what everyone thinks about that, it's clearly a very bad use of gas, oil, coal, which are hugely valuable resources, to just burn them for energy. So if there are better use for those substances in future, that would be a brighter future and one that everybody could get behind. But fundamentally, to get there need to be different technologies to the low-carbon technologies that are available today.
So is the Institute of Economic Affairs in favour, then, of the government intervening to encourage even more renewable energy systems, ways of... I mean, I think Ian Wright said wanted to revisit... No, was it John Longworth? Revisit fracking, which they, as it were, quotes, chickened out of. Is that a role of government, in your view?
Well, there's a range of views in the Institute of Economic Affairs. Yeah. We don't have one view.
All right, you...
on fracking, most free marketeers would say it's been a huge mistake to have a moratorium in 2019. And it's a huge mistake to continue that moratorium now, when quite clearly, with the price of gas shooting up, whatever one thinks of gas in the long term, more gas in the supply is going to be helpful. And particularly now we're outside the EU, as a potential relief on those prices. So the government has just made a huge blunder here. I see the Liberal Democrats have opportunistically picked up on this and have already started an anti-fracking campaign on the presumption that the government is going to go back down that path. But I think they're frankly naive on that. The government have gone so far down the green virtue signalling route as a preferred policy that it's deeply unlikely we're going to see this, however helpful it would be.
In your view, and it's consciously a theoretical question rather than price of gas or the cost of fracking or what have you, in your view, without government intervention, could free markets in energy keep everyone warm at an affordable price?
Well, the proof in the pudding was when we had energy market liberalisation the first time around. We have never had better security of supply or better lower prices, or indeed more competition in the market than at the high point of that at the start of this century. It's the level of intervention that's happened since then, particularly after the Climate Change Act, that has meant this sort of ratchet effect that they introduce bad policies that don't work. And then to try and fix the problems those policies cause, they introduce a new policy. So right now we can all see the energy price cap is a complete disaster. It's preventing the market reacting to what is a crunch in supply.
Although Greg Jackson of Octopus, doing quite well, thank you very much indeed, said...
I'm sure he is.
It fell apart because too many of the little ones who were trying their hand in a complex market didn't understand hedging, didn't buy enough forward, so they screwed up. The market was doing fine.
There's something in that, but it confuses two different parts of the market. So these are the retail energy companies. They're just the surface. They're the people that the public can see, and they're the ones who they're paying the bills to. But that's icing on a cake, and it's a huge cake. It's all of the generation sources that are the problem. And fundamentally, we've been increasing capacity in the UK from about 70 gigawatts to about 100 gigawatts. But most of that increase has come from intermittent renewables, so it's not actually real. It's stuff that needs backup when the wind isn't blowing. So, in fact, the capacity margin, which is the difference between supply and demand in the system, has been shrinking for the last 7 years or so.
And as a liberalisation in markets, which obviously you agree with, and as it happens in passing, so do I, and I've made that clear on the programme many times, the 6 that have gone bust were just a fabrication in the first place anyway. That was never really...
my energy company went
nobody
bust,
deep down can compete with Centrica and people of that size, N-Power.
It's not so much a size issue as a realistic market position issue.
Yeah, and what they actually do.
Yeah. So these companies were not hedged. That is the reason they are going bust. They were not hedged properly, rather.
Let me finish, and I interrupted you with some of it earlier, but I want your general view, because the question really is, has the power gone out of the market? And it's not just about energy. I mean, I sit here observing the functioning of the UK economy in 2021, and I think it isn't. And I think that one of the principal problems, and Johnson touched upon it in the Andy Marr interview this morning, on wages, we need to get back to higher productivity, people working harder and paying reasonable taxes. Companies need to be able to compete, and then consumers get good choices.
Yep.
Do you sense that the Tories are trying to veer back to that, or do you think it's now a lost cause?
The sense I get is they don't really know what they want to do.
That's pretty precarious territory.
Yeah. I mean, the response in policy terms is always to react to the last bad headline. And the bad headlines at the moment are about the fuel crisis. Yeah. So we're going to see a raft of measures that show that they are doing something. And those will store up problems for the future. I mean, the realistic response to these kind of problems is to let the prices rise. But if you've told the public that the worst thing that could possibly happen is fuel poverty or the cost of living going up, and you can do something about that, which you can't, then you're in trouble, because you're eventually going to disappoint people and they're going to notice. All they're doing at the moment with prices is transferring it onto taxpayers by putting taxes up. Yeah. So unborn children will be paying for this handling of the crisis for many years to come.
Yeah. I mean, finally, and we've talked about it so much on the programme yesterday, and indeed the previous weekend, the HGV, which is a labour shortage problem as much as anything. I mean, that at least Johnson has grasped the bullet and saying that HGV companies, hauliers, need to get their act together and offer decent working conditions. We just heard it from a Yorkshire lorry driver talking to our reporter up there, that it really is for them about a company providing decent working conditions and a decent wage, and they will come back problem solved like that.
There's quite a lot in that. It's certainly the case the wages have got to go up.
Yes.
Clearly there are not enough hauliers. The working conditions need to improve if they're not attracting younger people into the market, and clearly they're not. Right at the margin of that, they also do have a point about immigration and the government being a bit tone deaf to this crisis coming down the line for about 3 years. They're not reacting fast enough. And frankly, the 3-month visa offer is derisory. You need to get people in, not just the EU, but around the world.
React quite fast enough either, because they were very happy to employ cheap labour from Eastern Europe before Brexit.
But that's not really a problem. That's just the way the market
reaction.
Yeah. One thing I do worry about with Eurosceptic commentary on immigration is there's something of a fantasy that if only the wages go up, then British people will do the jobs. Well, we know that's not true. You've got to have a situation where there are jobs that people want to do, and that's where the working conditions come in. If being a haulier becomes an attractive role like being an airline pilot used to be, yeah, sure. But it's not just about the hauliers at that point. Are the retail companies really going to pay more money to have their goods delivered? And if not, then that's why the conditions are as they are.
And there's a market conclusion to either solution.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.